Hello and welcome to another edition of To The Point. Our guest this week is Radha Kumar, noted academic and also part of the panel of interlocutors for Jammu and Kashmir. Welcome to the show, to the Point, and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television as well. The interlocutors submitted their report around 7 to 8 months ago to the Home Ministry, and it's just been made public on the websites and has been drawing a lot of criticism as well as some positive remarks from all over the media as well as stakeholders in the whole issue. Let's take a look at what the report actually says and recommends, the report that was given by the interlocutors to the Home Ministry. Let's take a look.
After being kept in cold storage for over 7 months, the report submitted by the 3 interlocutors for Jammu and Kashmir was made public recently by the Home Ministry. The interlocutors spent over a year interacting with various stakeholders in Kashmir, holding over 700 meetings in all 22 districts of the state. The report contains recommendations by the panel which are proving to be quite contentious. The panel has recommended a review of all central laws applicable to the state, including Article 370 and the Article 356. The panel also suggested that the word temporary be dropped from the special status statute. The report has come under intense criticism from not just the opposition parties in New Delhi but also the separatist lobby in Srinagar. While the separatists have termed the whole exercise futile, the BJP has branded the idea of devolution of administrative powers akin to the trifurcation of the state on communal lines. The panel has also come under attack for ignoring their mandate and digressing from the task they were asked to do. The non-favourable response to the recommendations in the report notwithstanding, the report has certainly put the spotlight back on Kashmir and is perhaps a starting point of a fresh dialogue process. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Ma'am, before we go into the nitty-gritty of the report that's just been made public by the Home Ministry, give us a sense of what the 1 year and more than that you spent in Kashmir intermittently.
At a very basic level, I don't think I have ever seen such a sense of frustration. And that cut across every district. There was a very visible unhappiness with the conditions, but a sense of discrimination. Obviously in relation to the Indian Union, but also in relation to each other and to their own government and to elites. And maybe that's partly because this state having had a certain ambiguity always over its status. Everything is politically charged. There is no part of daily life which somehow does not have a political element to it. And of course, the security threats and problems have simply compounded that sense of frustration. So we did feel that certainly everybody wanted a solution. Now, having said that, there were many different views on what the solution should comprise. Some of them were, sectoral views. Very few were overarching for the whole state. But I don't believe that that is necessarily a problem. It makes things a little more difficult, but it's a fairly obvious and natural outcome of 20 years of armed conflict.
Ma'am, are you satisfied with what the panel submitted to the Home Ministry just over a year ago? Are you satisfied with the work you did in Srinagar? Do you think the report that you submitted to the Home Ministry just a year back comprehensively covers all the issues that Kashmir and Kashmiris face currently?
First of all, I'd like to distinguish between the two. Our mission and our report are actually fairly distinct. The value of our mission was that for the first time there was a sense that people had that they had a direct channel to New Delhi, and the fact that we went every month and, as you say, visited every district and reached out to the public rather than inviting people to come and see us, I think helped people to feel that there was this channel of communication on some of the critical political issues, right. Because obviously there's no question of bypassing their own government. And that helped, I thought. It also helped that we took up issues as we worked. You know, we made monthly reports and recommendations, and we followed up on those recommendations whenever we went. Of course, you know, you cannot claim very much. But even if you manage to follow through a few human rights cases and get some people released, or you get some FIRs withdrawn, or you know, focus the attention on the water shortage in one place which has not received attention before, or you ask why is it that you are having communal polarization in areas which previously never had them. Whatever it is, that kind of thing I think helped.
Right.
And that, of course, is not something that comes into a report of the kind that we submitted, because our report is trying to tackle.
So you think you've fulfilled your mandate, the mandate given to you by the central government? Do you think the mandate has been fulfilled, or how would you respond to charges from some areas, from some media critics, if I could call it them? They have said that you've completely ignored your mandate, you've gone beyond it, you've digressed. Would you agree with that?
I would not, actually. Our mandate was to have the widest possible interlocution with the people of Jammu and Kashmir. And we did have the widest possible interlocution. That is the widest in our capacity. Someone else might have had an even better and wider capacity than we did. Our report tries to summarize the various views and recommendations that were made to us. Now, of course, there is a big gap in that the Hurriyat people and their affiliated civil society groups did not really meet us. In one or two localities, certainly we had Hurriyat supporters coming to talk to us. But that's no substitute at all, and if people came, they came on an individual basis, not on a
We'll talk about, ma'am, we'll talk about the Hurriyat as well, but just in a bit. Before that, I want to ask you, very pertinent question. Something has been flying around in circles in Srinagar as well as New Delhi. The overarching feeling, if I could call it that, term it that, in Srinagar right now, and this is what I get from talking to people there, is that the whole panel, and you can dispute this if you want, the whole panel, the whole idea of a panel going into Kashmir as interlocutors was set up because at that time Kashmir was burning. There was 100 people had died over protests against the security forces, and this was kind of a diversion created. Would you dispute that charge, first of all?
Well, let me say that that is a question for the government of India. Insofar as we are concerned, I would certainly challenge anybody who said that we used our mandate to buy time. We worked literally 16 hours a day. And we tried to fulfill our mandate, which was a limited mandate. Well, let's say it was a very open-ended mandate because it said widest possible interlocution. But it didn't say what we could do with that interlocution. Eventually what happened was we wrote a report. I'm fairly sure that people in Jammu and Kashmir would not say that we didn't work hard. And we fulfilled our mandate to the extent that was within our capacity, as I say, in all the meetings we held and the places we went. And we tried to cover all the issues that anyone brought up before us.
Right.
And then we wrote a report, and we completed all of this in 1 year. And I should also say that we did a small amount of confidence building in also the government. And there I do feel a bit sad, because I too would like to know, or I would like to stress that it is very important for the government to take action.
Right, right. We'll take a small break here, ma'am. We'll come back and talk about the nitty-gritty of the report. Don't go anywhere. More with Radha Kumar after this short break. Keep watching To The Point. Welcome back. You're still watching To The Point, and we're still in conversation with Radha Kumar. Ma'am, one of the more contentious recommendations in your report was the devolution of power from Srinagar, and also regional councils, separate regional councils for Ladakh as well as Jammu. Now, some people would say that the devolution of power is not really a solution because the problem itself lies in the valley, and Jammu and Ladakh are sort of insulated from the main problem, the crux of the problem, which is separatism, which is militancy, which is alienation. Would you agree with that, and how would you defend the devolution argument?
First of all, where the problem lies does not necessarily mean that that is the only place where the solution lies. And remember that the problem is about the whole of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Indeed, many would argue it's about the whole of the former princely state of Jammu and Kashmir, which is now divided in many parts. So the solution will have to apply to all those parts. And if it has to apply to all those parts, then all of those parts have an equal right to determine what the future or what the consensus solution will be. Of course, the trick of winning a consensus is a separate matter.
Right.
Then comes the second part, which is very important, which many people have said, that this idea of regional devolution
is akin to trifurcation.
Is communal, yes, and that it's akin to trifurcation. I would argue absolutely the opposite. We have all seen, in fact, the growing communal polarization. And I may say to my sorrow that we have seen the ripple effect of spread of the problem in the valley to most parts of Jammu and Ladakh. The virulence of the political opinion there today is astonishing in the difference today from what it was even 10 years ago, let alone 20 or 30. And so, again, you come back to this, that the solution has to have everyone involved in it. Regional devolution, in my opinion, is actually a way of removing some of the stings and allowing reintegration of the state, reconciliation, peace building, ways now for the people of what is contemptuously called the 2.5 districts of Jammu, as well as the other districts of Jammu, Kargil and Ladakh.
Right.
The valley itself is not homogeneous, either in its political opinions. And all of them, you will find, will tend to channelize many of their political frustrations into complaints about discrimination from the other.
Right.
Wahan se nahi milta, wahan se nahi milta. So if you do administrative devolution, which is has to be right down to the panchayat level, and the district may indeed emerge as the most important element in that devolution in terms of administration, then you are actually taking the sting out of the discrimination argument so that it cannot be used anymore, and you have your all state services. Your civil service is all state. Your police is all state.
Right.
So you have all your integrative services over there, and you have one legislative assembly. So your laws will be determined only by the legislative assembly. We are not touching the composition element of that, because in any case, the whole business of, delimitation of constituencies is frozen.
Ma'am, what about the report also mentions that there should be no going back to pre-53 status. There's really no point in that. And the centre should re-examine and review all the laws applicable to the state in the context of whether it relates to the state or not, whether it relates to the welfare of the people of the state or not. Principal opposition party, the BJP, is obviously opposing this and saying that this is absolutely no way of going about it. How would you defend that particular point in the report, where it says that it should re-examine all laws, including 370, Article 370. At the same time, the report says if you have to review all laws applicable to the state, but also remove the temporary in front of that article, isn't that sort of, doesn't that give out a confusing signal?
We did not anticipate it would be confusing, but we have seen that it is. In fact, that's one of the questions that Mehboob Beg was asking. So, first of all, I'd like to say that when we talk about the no pre-53 and at the same time say review all laws, by and large we're talking about minor laws. Things like the postal system or so on, with stamp duty, excise tax. These are things that integrate Jammu and Kashmir.
These are administrative deliverables, if you could call it.
No, these are laws or directives that integrate Jammu and Kashmir into both an Indian and a global economy, since India is now very much a part of the global economy, and no doubt Jammu and Kashmir, the people would like to be part of a global economy and part of a globalizing world. So that's what we mean about the no return, that these are things that we think are innocuous, not objectionable, and certainly they have no big political significance. But when it comes to the politically significant laws, which vitiated, many would say, the terms of the agreement between Jammu and Kashmir and the Indian Union, we say that those do require a look and a settling. I mean, how long is an agreement to be temporary? It's been more than 60 years. So you have to decide one way or another. Do you want this in its entirety? Do you want this with some changes? And that we believe that the political leadership of India and of Jammu and Kashmir, including the opposition obviously, can sit and come to a rapid conclusion on this matter. It should not be a difficult matter to resolve. And ultimately, you know, the BJP, when they were in government, they certainly did not want to abrogate Article 370. In fact, they did not have such a debate in the many years that they were in power.
Right. Ma'am, we talked about the Hurriyat just a while back. Let's just delve a little deeper into the Hurriyat angle here. The Hurriyat Conference, both the factions refused to meet with the panelists, the panel interlocutors as well. But you did have one small meeting with Maulvi Abbas Ansari as well, at which point, after it became public, he was suspended from the Hurriyat. Do you think the Hurriyat has a point when they say during the NDA government they met L.K. Advani, who was the Home Minister then, and Deputy Prime Minister as well, and they say when we meet the top people in the government, we can't take a step back and just meet interlocutors, and we have to maintain that same level talking directly to the government. Do you think they have a point, or do you think they're just paying for time?
Well, let me not impute any motives. I do know that they have always refused to have formal meetings with interlocutors, so this would have been altering, let us say, a tradition of theirs. And I certainly harbor no resentment that they did not meet us. But I would say that it seems to me that if you are interested in furthering a peace process, then all of you, and this is not directed at the Hurriyat, our media, our political parties, some of our think tanks in Delhi, frequently ask me this question: how can you, want to talk to people who have no integrity or who have been involved with militancy or this or that? The fact is, if you could make peace with your friends, I mean, if it was a question of your friends, one hopes that it would not get to such a point of conflict. Right. You have to make peace with your opponents or your adversaries. And the more you talk, the better the chances of being able to move ahead.
Right.
And it's within that context that I would say that that dialogue is vital. Everyone knows that as far as the valley is concerned, and also, by the way, as far as, the Pakistani held parts of Kashmir are concerned.
Gilgit and Baltistan.
We need Gilgit, Baltistan and well, what they call as
POK.
Yes.
Right. Ma'am, on that point, we'll take another break. We'll come back and discuss a little more about the report itself and your experiences in Kashmir. We'll take another break right now. We'll come back with Radha Kumar, more conversation about her Kashmir experience after this break. Keep watching To The Point. Welcome back. Still in conversation with Radha Kumar. Ma'am, there have been some reports in the media as well about how there were differences between the three panel interlocutors themselves, and there were reports, in fact I read in some paper today as well, that after the differences cropped up, you started visiting Kashmir separately. All three started visiting Kashmir separately. Is there any truth in those reports?
No, we did not visit Kashmir separately. I went once in July by myself. But that was with the consent of my colleagues who at that time were not able to go. I know that Dilip also went once, but to attend a conference. So that was never an issue. In fact, I often wonder whether we should have been more flexible and gone both together and separately, because that way we could have spent even more time there. But that's more a logistical issue. Yes, certainly there were differences between us. We should not try to hide them or mask them over. That's partly because we are three fairly opinionated individuals with our own different experiences.
Yeah. Which is fair enough, and we understand that, of course. We were talking just before...
we came together to write a joint report.
Absolutely.
Despite those, and it took quite a lot of swallowing of opinion
of
to
egos
do that.
As well, I'm guessing.
I mean, luckily we agreed that our basic task was to summarize what had been told to us, not to put our own fix on things.
Still on the Hurriyat, Mr. Gilani is the hardline faction of the Hurriyat, and he has some very unflattering comments about the report as well as the interlocutors and the mandate given to them. Do you think he's just playing to his old constituency, which could perhaps be the case, or do you think that again, coming to Mirwai's point, saying that if we've dealt with the Home Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister before, we should maintain that level of government contact. Do you see hardliners as well as the Mirwai's faction, which is not that hardline? Do you see any convergence between those two, if at some point in the future the government decides that they will send a panel, perhaps to the cabinet minister or a senior functionary of the government? Do you see them coming together at all, based on your experience and what you saw in Kashmir?
I would be very surprised. I don't think the Hurriyat M and the Hurriyat G can come together. And, you know, we should remember that there's a lot of, first of all, I would say it's actually the sign of democracy to have different political groupings emerge. And generally in a resolution process also, you will have more emerging in the phases towards the resolution, and then maybe some coalescing and some falling or dissolving and so on. So all of these are not surprising to me. And I would say that one should not underestimate, you know, there's been so much violence and so many actors have been involved and implicated in that violence that to just casually say you must all unite.
Right. Ma'am, the report was given to the Home Ministry over a year back. It's been a year since it's been made public.
7 months.
7 months, the best part of a year, in fact. Yeah. Do you think the Home Ministry sat on the report for far too long, or should it just have started some dialogue on that when you had submitted that report? Do you think it was delayed?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously the government has many reservations about the report. It would appear so, in that there must have been a lot of discussion and disagreement. And that's why it's taken so long, because at the end they have put it up on the web as a set of ideas for discussion, which is what it was intended to be right from the start. And that's another point I'd like to clarify, that this report is not meant to be a report that sets out a fixed solution to which parties must
agree to.
Well, yeah, or that we make recommendations that government must do this and then the parties should agree to this. That's not the nature of this report. It's a report that tries to, as I said, summarize the different. But what we've looked at, even when we've isolated specific issues, you know, which you referred to, 370 or
the devolution of
or the devolution of powers, or even things like nomenclature and governor and flag and so on. We've given options. We've said you can do A, B, or C, and then we've said, in our view, this would be the most feasible. But that doesn't mean
it's going to be accepted by everyone.
It's still absolutely the point is that there has to be some consensus. And it doesn't matter, you know, there are various ways in which peace processes can move ahead. You can make a consensus on a certain set of issues, while keeping your options open for other issues.
Ma'am, one very important question that I wanted to ask you was, based on your experience in Kashmir, you spent more than a year coming and going and meeting people, like I said before. What is the best way forward, do you think?
The more prolonged a conflict, the more vested interests develop. I'd also say there's a bigger psychological, sort of human psychological element, which is we humans, you know, we're very adaptable. So we get used to a situation, we often prefer the situation we're used to, even with all its flaws and failures, to an unknown new situation. And I would say that that is also there as an element, despite the fact that everyone wants an end, a solution, and wants to move on. So spoilers, obstacles, those elements are there, but that doesn't mean that you can't move forward. Spoilers tend to change quite often, and people you may think are a huge obstacle today may actually become proponents of the solution, or actually push that.
So you're saying times can change.
It's keeping what's very important. There are two things that are important. One is that it's time for the serious political dialogue on the concrete elements of the solution to start. And that's really the purpose of this constitutional committee that we have proposed. We're saying 6 months. We're saying here are certain elements on which you can get to an agreement, and we don't think anyone would object. I don't think the Hurriyat would particularly object if you reinforced 370.
Right.
So in that sense, the regional councils we know is more controversial because of this fear of trifurcation.
Right.
But it is my belief that if people look carefully at that and understand that if you do administrative devolution, then you get rid of the one of the big discrimination arguments, and you can tackle the political, and you have your integrative institutions there, your assembly.
Very briefly, my last question to you, if you could, very briefly, where does the panel, and especially you, stand on the military and the military presence in Kashmir? Very briefly, if you could, your view on that.
We say that Kashmir is entering a peace-building phase. Militancy is at an all-time low, though it should be noticed that targeted assassinations continue. And therefore, it should be possible to review what the security arrangements you put in place to deal with a high level of militancy, or before that to deal with interstate wars.
Right. Thank you very much, Radha Kumar, for joining us. That was Radha Kumar talking to us on To The Point. Till next time when we get to another special guest in another special edition of To The Point, goodbye and thanks for watching.